Hey guys, it's the tiniest one back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at an AIO called 2080 Ti. Now I know with the 2080 Ti's there can be a little bit of enthusiast kind of hatred towards them, but they are selling really quick out there now, and the manufacturers are pushing the cooling and the design levels with them quite a bit now. We've obviously got two big AIO called GPUs currently around. You've got the Kingpin from EVGA, and then you've also got the new ROG Matrix, which isn't technically out yet but is coming, and they both carry horrifically high price tags. But you know, they technically, I haven't reviewed them yet, so I can't really say, but they are shouting a lot about massive performance as well. Now, while the 2080 Ti is never going to be considered a cheap card, if you just look at 2080 Ti prices, the Gigabyte Waterforce Extreme can be considered, even amongst air-cooled cards, as a not too bad price. Now the 2080 Ti can be found online for $12.99, so it puts it about 120, 150 pounds above the base reference card's price. Now, if you were to kind of consider the base reference card price being $11.50 with an air cooler on it, this having a full-blown AIO and RGB and all of that sort of stuff, when you consider how much you could pay for a 240mm AIO to cool your CPU cooler, the prices don't actually end up sounding that bad if you take a little bit of a chill pill about it. I do have the 2080 version as well, which is going to be in the graphs, but technically what Gigabyte did is they sent me this one, and I only get them for a bit. They sent me this one and they said, would you like to borrow this one at the same time so you can kind of compare? And I thought that would make a nice little touch to chuck this in the graphs at the same time. Now this one can be found for £850. Bearing in mind that they do have an air-cooled version that's £799. When you put those kind of things into the mix, this one actually does sound relatively good value. Now, I will talk to you about all of the temperatures, overclocking. We've got some really nice gameplay stuff side by side to be able to show you as well, which is something new, which we're trying at the moment. And then we'll split it all up and have a good look at the end. Now, the one thing that I would say about both of them, because they both look identical, is that the hoses, there's basically plastic hoses underneath a very thin nylon braid at the top, and it's not something, I think it lets it down. If they'd gone with the normal kind of rubbery style hoses with a nice thick braid over the top, it could have made things look a lot nicer. The other thing is the fact that they drag the cables down the side of the hose. Yes, that does mean that the GPU itself controls the cooling fans on the other end, which is a really nice touch. I just wish Gigabyte had gone about a cleaner way to have possibly done it, and maybe even stolen some ideas off of the boys at Fractal when they made their AIO before, where the cables for the fans actually went up the hoses but were completely hidden. This really does feel like something that was possibly released 4 or 5 years ago. It feels a bit rushed and cheap, and in reality it's something that hasn't really sat very well with me, and I've never been able to come to a way that I would like doing it. Also, because of the fact that the connections for the fans are so far up the actual hoses themselves, there's no even cheeky ways that you could take them off and hide them and maybe wire them straight into your CPU. So I think what you'd end up doing is having to strip the GPU itself and then hide the cables inside, and then, I don't know, maybe run your normal cooling fans. Now that's all right for someone that wants a project and wants to customize, but for the bulk of the customers out there that just want to fit and forget, that's probably not the best thing anyway. There are a lot of video connections on the back though, more than your average 2080 Ti. You get 3 DisplayPorts and 3 HDMIs plus the USB-C, which is a nice touch. The actual cooling cover sort of thing itself, you can see the AIO right in the middle there, so the AIO pump and cold plate, and then they do have a big cold plate section underneath which has got lots of heat pipes. So this is effectively the actual GPU side of it is completely passive. There is no fans or airflow or whatsoever on this, and that's a really nice touch, and I actually personally quite like that. The shroud itself's got a nice window, and there is some RGB on it. Again, I will show you this at the end when we put it on the desk. But the plastics on it, there's just something about it doesn't feel particularly nice. I think they could have done a better job with adding some extra graphics or something on it, just to kind of get rid of the black kind of Chinese style plastics on it, or maybe gone for some more RGB or, you know, some color accents, just to make it feel that little bit more premium. Round the back on the back plate, you get the Aorus logo and a relatively plain, but also at the same time nice back plate. It's one of the nicer back plates out there I've seen. Although the placement of the Aorus logo and even the design of the Aorus logo, I think it's because it's angular, it still just makes me think of ROG. But still, it's there, it's recessed, but it's still flushed, sorry. But the actual, the AIO side, RGB side of it, underneath is still nice, and it actually lights up quite nicely as well. But like I said, it's just a shame about the placement. I think it might have been nice if they tried to be a little bit more unique with it, rather than kind of following the pack. Anyway, so the looks are a bit hit and miss, but what is the performance like? And one of the things I will say about the performance is, please go and take a look on the OC3D website for the rest of the graphs and all of the pictures and a full rundown if you're actually interested in the possibility of purchasing this card or looking at putting it on your shortlist, because there is a lot more data over there if you would like to go and take a look. So you're going to see some overclocking results in a minute set alongside the stock results. So I just thought I'd show you this little screenshot so that you can see that we actually got a 215 megahertz max clock. Now that's a peak which our GPU boost does, but the average, which is the number that we actually want to know, because that's it's going to be the most consistent speed rather than what could be a very, very quick peak, is 2067, so 2067 megahertz. We achieved that by going 100 megahertz above the stock boost, the stock clock. So the stock clock is actually 1350. We boosted that up to 1450, and then everything else then follows suit after that. Okay, so just quickly, while the gameplay is running in the background, essentially you've got the 2080 on the left, the 2080 Ti at stock in the middle, and then you've got the 2080 Ti with a manual overclock on the far right hand side. You can see the temperatures up there and the FPS as well. These are all at 4K and they are all at Ultra. At the first pause moment, there's not a great deal between the temperatures on this. So you get a 3 degrees drop going to the Ti, amazingly, with the AIO, but then it evens out again when you get the overclock in play. But something that I did find rather amusing was the FPS difference that you get going from the stock to the overclocked Ti. I mean, you can see there that you've got a 12 FPS difference there just by giving it an overclock. Now, 12 FPS for the game is a crazy amount of difference. But then if you actually look from the 2080 up, I mean, that's like 27 FPS difference, and that's insane. Well, that's just huge. On our second pause screen, again, the temperatures are all fairly similar. You do get a nice little boost with the overclock, but nothing actually major with Monster Hunter. And I'd say that the difference between the cards performance-wise going from the 2080 up to the 2080 Ti is much tighter than we saw before in the Division as well. Temp's pretty much the same again. The AIO definitely doing its job with these games. It does keep them very, very much in check and around the same sort of degree centigrade as well. And with this, again, you can see a fairly healthy boost with the overclock from the Ti going from 65 to 73. But when you consider that that's a 26 degree FPS difference between the overclock Ti down to the stock 2080, that's actually a fairly healthy boost. And we also need to remember that we've got this game running at Ultra in 4K as well. So to get those kind of boosts is actually a bit nuts. Deus Ex pause, again, temperatures all pretty much the same, and they were consistent with a lot of the gameplay that we were doing as well. And again, the FPS difference, you get a nice 9 frames per second going from stock 80 up to the Ti, which is obviously quite nice. And if you do overclock, you get another 6 frames per second on top. But the difference there is because Deus is a very stressful game. It is, as I've already said, being run at Ultra in 4K. It's nothing mind-shattering like we saw earlier on with the Division. Okay, so conclusion-wise, performance overall for the 2080 Ti was really strong, but the overclocking on it was absolutely monstrous, and it responded really well to that to the overclock that we put on it, like really well, as you've seen with some of the numbers. And if you did click through to the Overclock 3D website, you'll see pretty much every game had a decent boost, but some of them were like huge, like massive boosts. With the 2080 though, although we're not focusing on that as a review today, it didn't really respond very well at all. Much above 110% on the boost, it actually became unstable, even though it did feel like it wasn't getting enough power. Voltage didn't help matters either. So it was just one of those times where the card just didn't feel very strong at all. Now, I know a lot of people think the review samples are just cherry-picked. Sadly, with the UK specifically, that doesn't happen at all. So both of my samples actually came from a retailer this time. So yes, Gigabyte did get them, but they didn't have any in stock, so they had to get them to send them across. So they've come from normal channels. But like I said, the 2080 Ti did do exceptionally well. With both, the temperatures were not only very good because of that water cooling, but it didn't necessarily matter what game that you were running or how much load that you were putting on it. They all stayed within sort of like 5 or 6 degrees of each other. And like I said, that didn't matter what game we were running, what benchmark we were running. So again, that kept things very, very tight and clean. That also meant that the fans also never really span up either, which made for a really pleasant kind of quiet gaming experience. When it comes to the card itself and actually using it though, the hoses and the way that the hoses have been done are the biggest letdown. As you can see in the system that I've got by the side of me, we've got the fans with the hoses at the bottom. We actually couldn't fit them with the hoses at the top. It's kind of an old school layout, and I say old school in the best possible way, in that they come out of the side and the hoses are only really long enough or designed for to go, I would assume, to the front of a case. And yes, this case is very unique in the fact that we've got a side mount, but it was a really good way for me to show one of the kind of like setbacks that you might have if you're trying to run this at home. I would also, you know, if you're going to have a case like this, I'd assume that you're probably going to be running an AIO on your CPU cooler, so you're going to probably need to think about the fact that you're going to need multiple radiator mounts. I would probably end up, because of using this one, probably end up with the GPU mounted in the front and then my CPU mounted in the roof. Just because, again, of hosing and stuff like that. A lot of people do give the Gigabyte RGB software, which is new RGB Fusion 2, a bit of grief. It's now standalone though. It actually kind of pains me to say it, but it works really well because it's basic. In that the software, so we've got the motherboard in there, we've got an M.2 in there, and the GPU. When we fit the GPU, it literally pops up and you can link it, and you've got several things that you can do with colours, and because of the fans are ARGB, you can actually get them to a selection of different things, and it does just work. But like I said, it works because it's basic. Thankfully now you don't have to install the other kind of software and stuff in the background as well, and it does make life a lot easier. So really my overall thoughts on it are, and the reason why I did this is where there are going to be so many, or there are a few really expensive AIO called GPUs coming up, I thought it might be nice to take a look at some of the ones that aren't going to want both your kidneys and instead only want half of your first one. So it's done really well. The 2080, I would say, I think we've probably lost the Silicon Lottery on that one because it just didn't overclock that well. So that would be the one that I would personally be assuming that I was going to be fitting, maybe giving a very mild overclock and forgetting. It's probably one of those ones for, you know, somebody out there that loves their technology but is afraid to kind of play with it and just wants to, you know, fit it and forget. With the 2080 Ti, you get such a reward for overclocking that, and with some of them, like I said, you even got like a 50% boost in frames once overclocked over the 2080. It's never going to make you think to yourself, oh, I'm glad I spent that extra money, but it might take the sting out of it once you empty your wallet to have got it. So there's plenty of kind of trade-offs there. There's a lot for you to kind of think about and kind of weigh up. I think I'm just going to leave you with, I wish Gigabyte had spent a little bit more time on those hoses themselves. But beyond that, they've done actually relatively well without removing the complete entirety of your wallet to get there. So it's one of you to kind of consider. If you want to pay more money to get something that looks nicer, you are going to spend a lot more money. But if you want something that's just cool, quiet, and overclocks really well, and you can forget about those hoses once it's in your rig, I'd kind of say that if you had a very heavily tinted glass in the side, you're probably going to lose all of that in it. Do you know what I mean? It will hide it kind of nicely. There's some things for you to think about there as well. But anyway, this is the tiniest one. Finishing off, out.